Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're tackling a really big question, actually. It's cropping up everywhere in digital creativity. Who really owns the stuff that AI generates?
Yeah, it's a hot topic. We've been digging into this report, AI as tool ownership rights, which gets into the weeds on the legal side, but also the philosophy behind it.
Right, and our goal here is really to, well, try and make sense of it all. Cut through some of the noise and give you a better handle on where things stand, especially if you're, using these tools yourself.
And the report kicks off with something quite fundamental, actually. It says you can't really talk about ownership until you figure out what AI is. Is it a tool? Is it software? Or maybe both?
Okay, yeah, that duality seems important. Let's unpack that. Tool, we kind of know what that means, right? An instrument, something you use.
Exactly, like a hammer or a specific function in a program, something that helps you do something. The definitions point to it being a means to an end.
Like the internet helps you research, a microscope helps you see tiny things.
Right. And from an anthropological view, tools are seen as extensions of us, ways we change the world around us. They amplify our abilities.
Okay, makes sense. An amplifier. And then there's software. That's different. That's the code, the instructions telling the computer what to do.
Yeah, the visible stuff.
Yep.
Programs, routines. It's all based on programming languages, binary code. That's what makes the hardware useful. You've got system software, application software.
And AI fits in there as application software, right? Because you give it input, a prompt, and it runs its instructions to give you back text or an image or whatever.
Precisely. It's executing complex instructions based on your request.
So putting it together, AI is software, technically speaking, it's code, but the way we use it makes it function like a tool, an instrument for creation or problem solving.
And that distinction, that software acting as tool idea, is apparently the foundation for arguing that the user should own the output.
Ah, okay. So if we accept it's fundamentally a tool in practice, then all the thinking that's already been done about humans and tools comes into play.
Exactly. Yeah. Philosophers have spent a lot of time on this, how tools aren't just inert objects. They actually become part of how we act, extensions of our own agency.
Right, like you forget you're even using it sometimes.
Yeah, the report mentions Heidegger and his idea of readiness to hand. When you're skilled with a tool, it just disappears into the activity, like a painter with a brush. It only becomes a separate object, presence at hand, when it breaks or you consciously study it.
I see. It becomes part of the flow.
And then you've got Marx, who saw machinery as embodying past human labor, dead labor. The skill isn't in the machine itself, but put there by humans.
So the intelligence is kind of borrowed or embedded from humans?
Sort of, yeah. And Dewey-linked tools to problem solving, applying knowledge. The common thread in all this philosophy is tools as enablers, instruments for human intention. And AI fits that description pretty well, doesn't it? It does what we ask it to.
It absolutely does. And just intuitively, if I build a birdhouse with a saw and hammer, I own the birdhouse, not the company that made the tools. That feels like common sense.
That's the gut feeling, yeah. And it lines up with things like lock-in labor theory. You own what you create by mixing your labor with resources. Using a tool is part of that labor.
And the whole justification for IP rights often comes back to rewarding that human effort, that creative spark.
Right. Whether it's utilitarian encouraging innovation or personality-based, the work reflecting the creator, the human input is key.
Which leads us back to using AI, because it's not just hitting a button. You craft prompts, you tweak settings, maybe you feed it examples. That's real input. That's labor, in a sense.
And that's the argument. That specific input, guiding the tool with your prompts and refinements, is the philosophical basis for saying you own the output. It's your intellectual contribution channeled through the AI.
Okay, philosophically, that makes a compelling case. But does the law see it that way? What do existing legal ideas say about stuff made with tools or software?
Well, that's the next crucial piece. And yeah, the report points to some pretty solid legal precedents. Think about automated factories.
The car company owns the cars, not the company that built the robot arms welding them.
Exactly. No one argues the robot maker owns the final product. Or take photography.
The photographer owns the copyright, not Canon or Nikon.
Right. The U.S. Copyright Office is clear on that. The camera's a tool. The photographer provides the creative choices, framing, light, moment. That's what gets protected.
And software we use every day, like Photoshop or music software.
Same deal. You create an image in Photoshop, you own the copyright to that image, not Adobe. You make a track in Logic Pro, it's your music, not Apple's.
So there's a consistent pattern here legally. Using a tool, even a really advanced one, doesn't give the toolmaker rights over what you create with it. Ownership stays with the user, providing the creative spark.
And even looking at software itself, legally, copyright protects the code, the specific way it's written, its expression, not the general idea or algorithm behind it.
So the AI company owns the copyright to the AI's code?
Generally, yes. Authorship is usually attributed to the human programmers, unless...
Unless it's work for hire.
Right. That's an exception where the employer owns the copyright if an employee creates it on the job, or sometimes control over making the program matters. But the core principle is human authorship of the code.
So how does that apply back to the AI output if the user is directing the software?
The argument being made is that your prompts and your fine-tuning are essentially instructing the AI software, much like you'd instruct a human artist or use a complex tool. This direction, this input, could be seen as establishing your authorship over the specific output generated.
Okay, you mentioned work for hire as an exception. That sounds potentially relevant here, even if it's complicated. Can we dig into that a bit more?
Yeah, it's worth looking at. So the work for hire doctrine basically says that the copyright owner isn't always the person who physically did the creating.
Yeah.
If you're an employee doing your job, your employer usually owns it. Or if you commission certain kinds of work from a freelancer, like a contribution to a movie or a compilation, and you have a written agreement saying it's work for hire, then the commissioning party owns it. The idea is to clarify who owns the rights when one person pays for or directs another person's creative work.
So the analogy someone might try to make is the AI user is like the commissioner. They're giving the instructions, the prompts.
That's the angle the report explores. By providing prompts, maybe fine-tuning the model, you're initiating the process, you're guiding it. It kind of feels like you're directing the creation.
But, I mean, it breaks down pretty quickly, doesn't it? An AI isn't an employee. You can't sign a contract with a large language model.
Exactly. That's the major hurdle.
Yeah.
Legally, work for hire requires specific relationships, employer-employee, or that written agreement between actual legal persons. AI is, well, it's not a person. It can't be an employee or sign anything.
So the doctrine doesn't directly apply?
No, not in a literal legal sense. But the principle behind it, that ownership can follow from direction and control, that's the part that resonates. The user's control via prompts kind of echoes the rationale behind work for hire, even if the legal mechanics don't fit.
And what are the courts or copyright offices actually saying about AI as an author right now?
Well, the dominant view, certainly from the U.S. Copyright Office, is pretty firm. Copyright requires a human author.
So if I just type cat sitting on a fence and get an image, that image itself probably isn't copyrightable.
Generally, no. Not if it's seen as purely AI-generated without significant human creative input beyond the simple prompt. They're starting to draw a line between that and AI-assisted work.
So if I took that AI cat image, then spent hours in Photoshop modifying it, selecting parts, combining it with other things, then maybe.
Then you might have a stronger case, yes. If there's substantial human creativity involved in the selection, arrangement, or modification of the AI output, that human contribution could potentially be copyrighted. International agreements like the Berne Convention also really emphasize human authorship. It's still being debated heavily, but for now, the law wants a human in charge.
Okay, let's pivot slightly. We talked about software code copyright belonging to the programmer. How does that definition of authorship for the software itself help us think about the output?
Well, like we said, the author of software is usually the person or team who wrote the source code. That's the copyrightable expression. Work for hire can shift that, or sometimes just who controlled the project.
Right.
So applying that logic, or rather drawing an analogy, when you use AI, you're not writing the AI's code, obviously. The developers did that. But your interaction, your prompts, your choices, the way you refine things, it feels a bit like giving instructions, doesn't it? Like telling a programmer what you want, or using a complex tool like Illustrator to design something specific.
Yeah, I see that. I didn't write Illustrator's code, but I own the illustration I make using Illustrator because my creative choices guided it.
Precisely. So the argument goes, the AI developers own their code, sure, but the unique output generated because of your specific creative instructions, that output arguably has your stamp on it, your authorship in a sense.
Okay, so it really does come down to how much creative input the user is actually providing. How significant is that prompting process?
It's absolutely fundamental. Prompting is how we talk to these things. And it's not always simple. The quality, the detail, the context you provide in a prompt, it drastically changes the output. People are developing complex prompting strategies now.
Like telling the AI to act as a certain character or giving it example.
Exactly. Role-playing, few-shot prompting, chain of thought. These aren't just typing keywords. It's crafting instructions. It's articulating a vision. The better and more specific the prompt, often the more unique the result. It's a form of creative direction.
And beyond just prompting, there's fine-tuning.
Right, that's a more involved process. That's where you can actually train a base AI model on your own specific data, maybe your writing style or images in a particular aesthetic or information about a niche topic.
So you're customizing the AI's knowledge or style.
Pretty much. It takes effort, selecting data, preparing it, running the training, but it allows you to really imbue the AI with your preferences or specialized knowledge. It's a very direct way of shaping how the AI behaves and what it produces.
So when you combine skillful prompting with potentially deep fine-tuning, it really does sound like the user is the main creative force here.
That's the core argument. The user's imagination, expressed through these interactions, is driving the process. The AI is this incredibly powerful tool, maybe the most complex tool ever, but it doesn't have its own independent creative goals or consciousness.
It needs the human spark.
It needs the direction, the user's intention, their vision, and their active engagement. That's what positions them as the primary creative agent. The AI is the instrument, they're the player.
Let's try and solidify this with those comparisons again, thinking about photography.
Yeah, it's a great analogy. An AI image generator is like a super advanced camera. The camera captures light. The AI processes data based on prompts. But in both cases,
it's the human making the key creative decisions. Composition, subject, style for the photographer, the prompts details, the parameters, the refinements for the AI user.
Exactly. And legally, the copyright goes to the photographer, not the camera company. So the argument follows. Copyright for the AI image should belong to the user, not the AI developer.
Okay. And music software, DWs, digital audio workstations.
Same logic applies. Musicians use DIW's complex software tools to compose, arrange, produce. They own the copyright to the resulting music, not the software maker.
So if I use an AI music generator to create a melody based on my prompts and parameters,
the precedent suggests you should own that melody. Now, the legal specifics for AI music are still being ironed out, lots of discussion there, but the analogy with existing music software is strong support for user ownership.
And finally, digital art tools. Drawing tablets, painting software like Corel Painter or Procreate.
Again, very similar. Artists using these tools own their digital creations. The software and hardware are facilitators. AI art generators are, functionally, just another tool for digital expression.
So the principle that the artist owns their digital work should carry over.
That's the logical extension, yeah. There are debates, especially around style mimicry and training data, but focusing purely on the tool analogy, it points towards the user owning the copyright of the art they create using AI.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, our deep dive suggests a few key things. First, AI really acts as both software and a tool.
And that tool aspect is critical.
Right, because philosophical ideas about tools and established legal precedents for things like cameras and software all point towards the user owning what they create.
Yeah, the person providing the direction, the creative input, holds the rights, not the tool maker.
And that user input through prompting and especially fine-tuning isn't trivial. It's a real creative contribution that shapes the output.
Definitely. It's the guiding intelligence.
The comparisons to photography, music production, digital art, they all seem to reinforce this user-centric view of ownership.
It's quite consistent when you look at how we've handled ownership with previous technological advancements in creative fields.
It really is. Which brings us to a final thought, something for you to chew on. As AI gets even more sophisticated, more integrated into everything we do creatively, how will our actual laws and just our cultural understanding of what it means to be an author or creator need to change to properly recognize the user's role in this human-AI partnership?
That's the big question going forward, isn't it? How do we adapt our frameworks to fully value that human contribution when the tools become so powerful?
Seems like a conversation that's far from over. Thanks for diving deep with us today.